What's up, everyone? Terry and I are here. We're back. Another episode of Unhinged with Terry Kavanagh. I'm your co-host, Carl Choi, with 24/7 Comics, co-founder and publisher. So I am broadcasting from the car today, Terry. Where are you?
I am in New York, in my home office in New York, in the one space that's accessible in the office.
I didn't want to miss today because the last time I saw this gentleman, we had a chance to break bread, had like a really cool breakfast, and just always great to kind of get to know the man behind the art, and especially someone who's very meaningful to you. So maybe without further ado, you want to do the quick intro and let's bring him on today.
Yes, today's guest is Stephen Platt. Not only an extraordinary talent, but a super nice guy. He and I go way, way back to our misspent youth. I don't think we misspent it together, but I'm pretty sure he misspent some of it the same way I did. So Let's bring him on.
Hi.
Yo.
Let me get an alignment. There I am. Okay.
Did you misspend some of your youth, Stephen?
Oh my God. Yeah, most of it, I'm sure. Just got enough drawing in to be somewhat employable.
That's all that counts.
Yeah.
And to get through without a felony.
Yeah, exactly. That anyone knows about.
Yeah. Statute of limitations is everything.
Yeah.
So Stephen, we always kick this off with the Unhinged before we really get into it and dive into some nostalgic storytelling. Is how did you guys meet, and what was your first impression of Terry? And Terry, same question for you.
Well, it's his story, so I'll let him go first.
Yeah, what happened was I was in art college, not really sure what I knew I needed to find something. I knew I was not going to do anything else but be a creative. I was pretty sure, but wasn't sure what that was going to be. And then there was a school trip to New York. This was my third year in college in art school. And I was on this sort of track that was heading towards advertising and graphic design. It was communication arts. There was nothing in the school at all that spoke to a career in comics. That kind of education just wasn't available in Toronto at the time. But I got on this, but I had a friend of mine who showed me some Marvel comics, said you should really try and do this. They're looking for people. And once I did that, I started putting pages together. That started in September. So by the time January rolled around, I was on a bus, Greyhound bus, headed to New York City with a bunch of like 50 other kids from school, and hoping that I would get my foot in at Marvel somehow, that someone in the office would see me. This fantasy, right? Like, so someone's gonna talk to you. And then I called Marvel and they were like, don't come here. Don't come up here. Like, don't come to the building. No. Just mail it. Go to a mailbox and put it in the mail. Don't come here. And that was it. That was like, and then that was the end of the conversation. Like, you're not supposed to come anywhere near the building.
I wonder who you spoke to.
It was just somebody on the phone. Someone picked up the phone and said, just don't.
Okay.
Like, we don't see people coming in with samples, right? You can imagine if they did, like, the chaos at the front door. Yeah, in the 90s, it would have been crazy. And then DC was the exact same message. And then I knew that Rob Liefeld was doing a signing at Jim Hanley's Universe on Friday. And it was an extreme signing. Deathmate, maybe some, I don't know. It was something. And I was like, well, that's my last shot. That's like my last, my only chance to see a real person who works in comics. So, and then it was Friday. It was my last day in New York City. And the whole week had gone by. And I was like, I guess I'm not going to, I was doing other things with friends. And then I guess I'm not going to get a chance to talk to anybody at Marvel or DC. And then I went to cash the traveler's checks when we had those things at a bank in New York. And it was like, and this guy walks in and he's got this huge Marvel jacket on with the characters all over it. And he gets in line. And so I'm like, I can't, he has to work there. And so I asked him, I said, hey, that's a cool jacket. Where'd you get it? He goes, I work there.
And divine moment right there. That's cool.
Huh?
It's like a divine moment. Yeah.
I had my pages on me, right? I had the 6 pages of continuity like they told you to do. I kind of trapped this guy in line because he can't get out of line, right? Just trying to get his money. So he's got his check, and then he's just like, I can see the look on his face. He's like, oh God, like, all right, I guess I'm gonna have to, stand in line and look at this guy's work. And then he looked at my pages, and he was like, oh shit, like, this is interesting. You should, okay, so this is what you're gonna do. Because at 2:00, come by the office, use my name to get in. Don't be late. And I go, who would I ask for? He goes, Whitey. Just ask for Whitey.
Yeah.
His real name is Jesus Gonzalez, but everyone called him Whitey, and he was the photostat guy. So he's the archivist. He's like the guy that he sees every page that comes to the company.
Yep.
Right. And I'm like, oh my God, is this really happening? And then, so I'm at Marvel like 1:30. Like, I'm not going to be late. And then at 1:45, I go up and I'm saying, yeah, like Whitey told me to meet here at 2:00. He said to use his name. And then she's like, and then the receptionist was very nice. And she's like, and the whole thing is behind glass. All of Marvel is behind glass. You cannot just walk in. Right.
Yep.
What do you mean behind glass? Like you walk in, there's like a tank?
All access to the office is sealed.
Yeah.
So there's only there's a receptionist who's sitting behind glass, and then there's an opening in the glass.
That would have been Erica.
Yeah, Erica. And then, but the door into Marvel is maglocked, right?
Wow.
So the entire all Marvel is sealed behind glass. And I'm sure DC was the same deal because you don't want weirdos walking in, right? Saying, look at my work. Please look at me. So I go up there and she's like, hold on a second. And then she just gets on the phone and goes, Whitey, there's someone here for you. And he came out. And just life was never the same after that moment. And the door opened. I was in Marvel editorial. I was in the main floor of Marvel offices in New York. And he just walked me around the entire perimeter of all the editors. And one of those editors was the guy editing Marvel Comics Presents, which I think is one of the greatest ideas in comics, which is sort of like farm team for comic book artists, and amazing recruiting idea. And Terry had samples. I think I gave him samples that day because I had multiple copies.
You did.
And it was the Punisher office with the other guys that got samples.
Carl Pop.
And then Bob Harris got samples. I had like six copies of samples. And then, God, maybe Tom Brevoort had samples. There was a couple of guys, but Terry definitely had them. And then Terry's the one that basically was the one that made the call and offered me a job. And it was Moon Knight. It was
four Marvel Comics Presents. It was, I think,
Marvel Comics Presents. Yeah.
I think it was a 4-part serial.
It was a 4-part serial. And I had done, and then it was just like, and it was this is the great thing about Marvel Comics Presents was it didn't throw you in the deep end right away, right? It tried to get you acclimated to being a Marvel artist, what the demands were in terms of you telling a narrative story sequentially, and without it was that there was get this done. We're going to be paying attention to how long it takes you, but don't worry about the deadline. Like, don't worry so much about, like, we just want you to be good and understand sequential narrative and understand sequential storytelling, and watch the drawing, watch the details, watch the backgrounds, like get all of that stuff right first. And then you kind of move up into another assignment. But it was just, I just think Marvel Comics Presents is one of the greatest things that ever came out of that company, only because it was such a great place to start.
Yeah, and it allowed me, and I just commissioned so much work all the time that I didn't have to schedule it right away. I mean, it drove the invoice department insane, Millie, because normally you had to assign an issue to every invoice that you put up there. And everything for me was inventory, because I was terrified. This book came out twice a month, and I was terrified of going with 8 blank pages at some point.
Yeah.
And you did not miss shipping in those days. There was real consequences to that.
Oh, yeah.
So
And
do you remember who wrote that story, Stephen?
I don't, but I do remember him. Yeah, I don't remember who wrote it. It wasn't you.
No, it wouldn't have been. Couldn't have been.
No, but it was a story. It had Bad Rock the Leaper in it,
Oh,
which I did draw, and those pages are somewhere.
I know.
But they disappeared because
Oh.
when Marvel went through so many leadership shuffles and just archivists changing hand. It was just like there's so many pages that changed hands. It was years before I even got any kind of communication from Marvel that they even had the pages, and then a lot of the pages were just gone.
Oh man.
So,
I hope Whitey didn't fall in love with them and took him home.
No, I think Whitey was already gone. He was, because they were making so many staff cuts as well. There was like personnel cuts, and
yeah, I had left staff by that point.
Yeah, and I think at that point, photostatting had transitioned into digital, and there was so much digital archiving, and so you have like and then the photostat machine and the photostat room was gone. But the photostat room to me is one of my greatest memories of Marvel because it was one of the first rooms that Whitey took me in.
Yeah.
And it was just literally, it was like he puts up all of his favorite stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
So he had this, it was like this hall of fame of just Marvel pages of like, it was incredible. It was like everything from John Romita to Mark Teixeira to like Adam Hughes to Jim Lee to Todd. Like it was just everything that had come through that while he was there.
And I remember the distinct smell of the ink.
Yeah. And the chemicals.
The chemicals, yeah.
Yeah. And that huge machine in the middle of the room. But yeah, he just like, he had all kinds of stuff. And then
it was a cheap high.
Huh?
It was a cheap high you could get.
He may have been high when he met me, and that's why I got in the that's how I got in the company. I don't know. This guy may be completely that's why that's
why the pages look like you guys were having so much fun. Is because everyone was like high off the inks.
Yeah. He did get a lot of visitors. But and that's what happened. And then we were I had done the first 8 pages. That had gone very well because I basically, when I was at school, I had all my instructors and professors were really cool because once I told them, I said, look, I don't know if I can I'm really trying to work these pages and do the best job I can. And I don't know if I'm going to be able to finish my typography assignment or my, my advertising work. And they were just like, are you crazy? Like, you don't have to, I don't need to see you again. You get an A. You pass, right? Don't worry about it. So all of them just give me like a free pass. And then it was like, just go work for Marvel, and that was it. And so I had really cool instructors.
That's cool.
So I was able to sort of focus on the pages. And then I think I was about 10 or 12 pages in. I was a bunch of pages into the next chapter. And that's when I got a call. I don't know if it was you, Terry, or Sarah.
Probably Sarah, but I recommended you.
Sarah Mossoff called and said, hey, it's Sarah Mossoff. We have 6 issues of Moon Knight that we need. Do you want to come in and draw Moon Knight for Marvel? Just to give you a heads up. Sarah already knew. Just to give you a heads up, it's going to be canceled at issue 60. Yeah. And then I said yes to that. And then, Moon Knight 55 happened. And then remember Wizard magazine?
Oh, yeah, of course.
It got a lot of traction at Wizard, and then it got traction at the retailers first, and then Wizard reacted to that, right? Mm-hmm. But it's gasoline on a fire in terms of the hype machine. And then I think I was maybe 3 issues into Moon. I was probably on Moon Knight 57 when Bob Harris called and said, I want you to do cable. You want you to come to the X office like right away. And then Scott Lobdell, and then I came back, and then I did my Marvel visit, which was another amazing experience. Marvel in New York in the summer. That was a summer visit, and it was just hanging out with Marvel editors, getting dinner with Terry, and talking about story, and then Terry just telling me all of his Marvel tales, which is amazing. And then
I have no filter. So
Yeah, it was great. It was great. And then
Great. It's
yeah,
pure
and then,
honesty, right? Like that's kind of what you want when you're absorbing all this stuff. So
yeah.
Steven,
So I was,
let's pause 1 second. I want to ask Terry his side of the story because obviously, at Marvel Comics Presents being an incubator, your pitch stuff endlessly, right? So do you remember that day when
I,
Steven came in with Whitey and then handed you the pages? Do you remember what your first impressions were and why you
I
thought?
don't remember the day exactly, but I do remember my impression of the work and just like, oh, this guy's ready to go. You know, and otherwise I would have just offered him an 8-page standalone story
Mm.
that I might never have used. And I certainly would have put an experienced writer with him, because that was my policy, to take experienced writers and put them with new artists and vice versa.
these are the pages. I don't think because the camera's not like
Wow.
focusing.
Oh, you have the pages? I was gonna ask you if you had them.
I have them.
Yo, that's sick.
Wow.
Yeah.
No freaking way.
They're on illustration board. That's how much I don't know. That's how much I didn't know. I didn't know anything.
That's awesome. So what were the samples like when you were passing them? Did you copy them on like 8.5 by 11? You copied them on the same size?
They were all. I think they were all like 11 by 17 samples.
Wow.
What characters? I
It
couldn't
was
see
Wolverine. It was a Wolverine Punisher team up because those were my favorite characters to draw. And that's just what I would gravitate towards.
Sick.
And it was just like this crazy. Here, I have another one. It's like,
Oh man.
I don't know if I can get the camera to
It's not.
focus on it.
A little bit.
Blurring it out.
We'll get those scans from you later, and when we do the cuts.
But
Yeah,
it was a Wolverine Punisher team up, and they were just like, and it was kind of like a Hell's Kitchen. They're going to take down some drug lords or something, and it was like, well, Logan owed Frank a favor, and that's why he was. Yeah, that's why he was coming along, and I just wrote something to get them in the same room, right?
Yeah.
I wrote it. I was like writing it and drawing it because I didn't. It's like 6 pages of continuity. Well, it's like I don't have a script. I don't. You know what I mean? I'm not a writer. I'm gonna have to make this up as I go along. You know, and so I did. That's exactly what I did.
I also remember you saying something like you had never really envisioned yourself doing comic books. Obviously, you were a fan of sorts, but hadn't really envisioned yourself because you just thought your style didn't lend itself until you saw like work by Todd McFarlane and Sam Keith.
Yeah, this guy at school who was big into comics. Let me see if I can get this thing to focus on me again. Okay, yeah. So he was big into comics, and what's going on here? Okay,
it gives you an air of history.
He was big into comics, and so he was way more informed about what was happening in the 90s. Like he was way more informed about what was happening in comics right now. And so when I was in school, it didn't occur to me that the way I drew might actually be okay for comic books, because my memory of comic books at that point was like George Perez and Paul Smith, right?
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, and so because I had left around 80, I hadn't been reading comics until I was like 84, 85. I kind of like stepped away, and I didn't have any friends there's no comic book store around me, so I wasn't seeing a lot. And then you come back like in the 1992, 93, and someone says, "Hey, this is what's happening at Marvel right now," and it's Todd McFarlane issue 328, where it's like superpowers Spidey pushing the Hulk through the logo, like smashing the Spider-Man, and I'm like, I'm just pouring through these pages, and I'm like, this is incredible. Like I could do this. You know what I mean? I think I can do this. If this is what they're doing, I think I can do this. So, and then it was like, and then from there, I just went to a comic book store and I discovered Sam Keith, and then I found Simon Beasley, and I'm kind of like, those were like the three guys that sort of had the most influence on me when I was drawing that stuff, because they looked like they were having the most fun, and they looked like they were the least restricted by the rules. Right? They were breaking every rule, you know. And when I came down from my Marvel trip, I had my lunch with John Romita Sr., which was an incredible moment for me. But you get to sit with John Romita And that was like, he was the kindest, nicest person. He was so cool. And it's like, I know he's looking at my work going, he must be thinking, what am I missing? What is happening? Right? What is happening to comic book art?
Yeah.
You know?
But he would never have said that. He would
No,
have, he would have spoken to your strengths, not weaknesses at all, if there were any.
No, he was, like I said, he was incredibly kind and nice. And I didn't know what I was really doing, which is maybe the fun I was having. And so I was, and I was definitely over my skis, probably on a lot of the drawing, but he was so nice about it. And then, he was just like, but he was mystified by the current trends in comics at that time, because it was just like, he didn't know what to make of Todd, right? He could, and he certainly could not explain the popularity of Todd, of Rob, of anybody who was just like completely outside of true representational, the John Buscema school of mastery of representational drawing, right? It was like, anyone who was way outside of that, I think he looked at Sam Keith, it was like mystified. He was like, he didn't get it, and he just sort of there was this one moment, I'll never forget it, and he's just staring out the window, and he's just like, I don't think I understand this world anymore. I don't think I understand. I'm just like, and I'm like, are you okay? And he's like, yeah. He just was like this 1,000-yard stare of just like, I don't get why the young kids are like, and it was another thing where he didn't understand, because he wasn't an era that he came from. He was shocked and maybe thrilled a little bit, but sort of shocked and always taken aback by how much young artists wanted to work for Marvel.
Mm-hmm. Because he came up, it was just a business, and you worked. If you got romance work, you did romance work. If you got horror work, and there weren't particular house styles or anything like that, there might have been a little more of one to Marvel in John's earlier days there. But there's a famous story about John Sr. being in Ralph Macchio's office, and I think they would either Spider-Man or Daredevil pages that had come in from John Jr. And John Sr. just sat there looking through the pages, beaming from ear to ear, smiling, saying, "Oh man, I don't know where he got this talent. He didn't get it from me."
Wow.
That's John Romita. He was self-effacing. He was a master of his craft, but never presented that way.
Yeah. And then he would tell me stories of, like, because he was obviously in New York at the time. You can imagine the illustration community, post-war. It was just like giants, right?
Sure.
And he was friends with all of them.
Yeah.
And it's kind of funny, but this is what he told me. He said, they'd go and they'd meet for drinks, or they'd have dinner, or they'd be a social gathering. And they're doing the covers of Time, they're doing Life magazine, they're doing National Geographic. It was like all these gold medal publications, and very innocently, like, John, what are you up to? What are you doing? And he would kind of feel a little bit embarrassed that he's drawing Spider-Man for Marvel. Like, it was like this pulp sort of
so weird,
less respectable business, when his friends are all doing the covers of Time and Pulitzer Prize winning publications, and here you are, in his mind, in the context of that social circle and that time, kind of slumming it with pulp at Marvel, and I'm just like, that's crazy, because now you can imagine what John Romita pages go for, with Spider-Man pages go for at Sotheby's, right?
Seriously. I mean, is it because at the time? Wild. Yeah, and so obviously, like, I can only guess, but is it at the time? And I don't know if this was shared from John Romita Sr. too. Is it because they saw themselves like a extension of like the Sunday Funnies kind of thing, where to them is more of a periodical business? It's like, we're just putting throwaway art out there. Is that the reason, or
that's probably part of it, I would say. And most lay people out there can't understand the distinction between comics, cartoons, and funnies. You know, I get
Yeah.
people all
Yeah.
the time telling me, "Oh, so you do like the Sunday funnies?" I'm like, "No." "Oh, so you draw Bugs Bunny?" "No." You know, it's all one big mishmash to them.
Yeah, and for me, like even just on the opposite end of John Romita Jr., like, because I didn't grow up with his art, like I actually look at what you do, Stephen, and I felt like at the time I totally understand it. But when I look at his art, I'm like, oh, it's great comic. I know the foundation where it comes from. But what I do gravitate to is like the '90s era, because in a
Right.
way, like, now that you mentioned Todd, mentioned Sam, and Simon, I could totally see how like somehow in your brain you integrate like the flexibility and the of Todd, and then you emulate like the proportions of Bisley, and then the details of Sam Keith. Like it all makes sense to me now that you mention it. But I still remember, like I didn't remember names growing up. I was like a total fresh off the boat, came out at 8 years old, didn't even read English, dyslexic kid. But comics, I read, I was attracted to the art, and so I still remember seeing that first Moon Knight cover that I think Terry wrote on. And I just remember seeing Splat, and I was like, "Wait, what is this? Is like a splat of something? Like what's going on here?" And so I remember that like your style really emulated your name, like your signature as well. And I remember just staring at it for a while and like trying to understand like who did this, what's going on, and it's very impressionable for sure.
I think one of the leaps these guys made in comic book storytelling was they really sort of introduced the focus panel.
Yeah.
Whereas in John Romita's day or Buscema's day, all the panels had equal value and weight.
Yeah.
And I think
Mhm.
you guys started doing things where there was a focus to a page and the rest of the scene took place around that.
Right.
Is that a fair thing?
Yeah. Yeah. I think at the time you're definitely like I was being influenced. I don't know what's going on with my camera here. But I was being influenced by a lot of modern comics. And
Mhm.
so I think just the compositions were changing, the page compositions were changing. The image style had already, because when I started figuring out that I was going to try and do this, image had already hit.
Mm.
And so image was like splash with like narrative panels around it. Like each page almost had its own little splash in it. You know,
Yep.
it was
Definitely.
big figures, right? And then there was like, or there was a narrative and then punctuations with big figures. And it just, and so that was like, that was kind of like, well, I thought, well, this is the narrative. I mean, that's the style that excited me. And then that's what I think what I gravitated towards. And then I have always been, since I was a child, I've always been fascinated with details. And so it didn't,
Mm.
since
That's clear.
I've been drawing that way my whole life. It wasn't like, it wasn't a new thing. Like I'm going to put in a bunch of detail. Detail is my default.
Dope.
So I've
Same.
never been like the kid that I was never like nowadays I have a huge appreciation for people who can capture things in a few lines, especially my friends that work in animation, who produce
Mm.
amazing animation illustrations and they are not doing the detail. And then when I started storyboarding um, in feature films, obviously that's such a high volume business where you're doing 100 to 150 new drawings every day. The volume, the detail has to go, right? Because you're expressing an idea to a director, you're not illustrating, you're communicating. It's a huge difference. So I had to deprogram my comic book brain and get into the story brain and get into a storyboard brain, which is entirely different because that is all about communication. And that's communication for execution in several different departments simultaneously. Where comic books, like, no, the drawing is the thing, right?
Yeah.
But it's also about communicate. You have to communicate the story with the drawing. So
Yeah.
you had a built-in background going into your storyboarding because that's
Yeah.
effectively what you're doing in a comic book.
Yeah.
And I can see from what you're saying about the detail why, when you quit reading comics around the Paul Smith era, you thought this is not my thing because Paul could do in very few lines, he could communicate a lot.
he was such a master, and still is, I assume. But probably my favorite comic book artist in my formative adolescent years. And on the polar opposite was George Perez, who was the opposite. And then another thing that was happening to me, which I'm sure has a huge influence on me, is that because there were no comic book stores, but there were lots of magazine stands. I was picking up heavy metal when I was like 12. And so a lot of European comic book artists were like early influences on me. So I was drawing Rank Sorox, I was drawing Arzak, I was drawing Enki Belial when I was like 12, right? I was drawing Philippe Droulet, when I was like 12. Like that stuff is still, and that has found its way into, that has never left my art. So those are all like huge detail guys. And I think that's when I started, because I was just copying them and copying their details. When I got into drawing comics, the details didn't bother me. I thought they needed to be there because the European guys were doing all that stuff.
And Carl, to get back to, you asked me what my side of the memory of meeting Steven and seeing his art for the first time. Like I said, I remember distinctly thinking he's ready to go. I didn't want to just give him a 8-page story. And I also was acutely aware with Marvel Comics Presents that what I was doing was training people to be taken by the X office or the Spider-Man office or one of the other offices. So I always knew I want to get great work out of these guys for as long as I can before they get grabbed by one of the other offices.
They wanted me to leave Moon Knight at 57.
I know, for Cable, and you're a perfect artist for Cable. I could totally see that.
Yeah.
You have since told me that Scott Lobdell was trying to convince you to do
Scott
that.
Lobdell would be like, Sarah walked me up to see Bob because he wanted to see me because he knew I was in town.
That was her mistake. If I was Sarah, I would have not told you that.
Yeah, well, I had already been offered and I had accepted Cable, but I said I'm going to finish Moon Knight, and so he's like, fine, because I knew Moon Knight was going well, and I was having a great time, and I just loved you guys. You guys were such a great group, you and Carl and Sarah. I just loved hanging out with you, and it was a really good vibe, and I'm really glad I did stay. Yeah. But I would go to Bob's office, and then Scott Lobdell would be like kind of walking up to you. Sarah's like over here, and Scott's like, bolt now.
So were there any politics, like, Terry, like as we hear, it sounded like people were fighting for Steven's time, right? So what were like the behind the scenes politics like? And Steven, were you aware of it at all? Or were you just kind of like head down, getting stuff done?
You have to remember the climate of talent recruitment at that time. Image were calling anybody that they could get a number for, right? Ooh. They were looking to expand their library. So Image founders were hunting for talent. And that was like DC, Valiant, Marvel, everybody. Like they're trying to grow their studios because anything with an eye in the corner was doing 500,000 copies no matter who was drawing it, right? Yeah. You just needed a body on a book and you can make $500,000. Wow. Because there were 10,000 retailers at that time, like 10,000 diamond accounts at that time, and everybody was ordering massive amounts of Image. Yeah. So Rob could open a studio full of people no one's ever heard of and make, $10 million, $12 million in 1 year, right? Like, so you have to think about that's the environment. So anybody who gets a little bit of traction publicly or a little bit of heat, it's like I think there was a hurry, an urgency to position them at the company on something prominent as quickly as possible.
Yes.
Because everyone knew that Rob Liefeld is hunting. Jim Lee is hunting. Mark Silvestri is hunting. Todd, not so much because he's Todd and he was a solo act and there wasn't a guy for Spawn other than Greg. I don't think Todd was going to give that book to anybody. But in terms of like guys who had the studios, who wanted to expand the studios, and then we're offering, and then their offers, right? They were making sure, because the money was rolling in at that time, the offers going out to talent were definitely, they were like looking to basically trump whatever the big publishers could offer, because the big publishers were like large corporations, right?
Yeah.
So they already had their deal structures in place about what they were able to do. And then the image owners were coming in like, I'll buy you a car. I'll give you a bonus. I'll give you this much per book. Like, you know what I mean? And it's like they could, because they had the liquid at that time to make those offers like right away.
Yeah.
So the environment in which talent was being recruited was totally different.
Yeah.
Same.
So
I know they were after Jay Lee when he was doing Namor for me.
Totally.
They were hunting down Jay all the time. And, you know, Jay was young. And because of Marvel Comics Presents, I developed a sort of, I couldn't afford to get annoyed at everyone who took the talent from me, because I knew it was coming. I didn't have except when Weapon X ran in Marvel Comics Presents, they weren't going to get the kind of sales they were going to get on almost any other title. So I didn't have the ability to keep them there for that reason. I hoped that they would stay as long as possible because they enjoyed the working relationship. But again, financially, people should chase the best deal for themselves, not just the best money, but the best creative deal. And if you know, Steven's saying that Wolverine and Punisher were his favorite characters, then that's a direction he's going to want to move in. And there was money to be made there as well. So I was aware of that all the time because of Marvel Comics Presents. So I think I had a little less political resentment than a lot of people, but there were offices that would get mad at each other. But we tried. Look, we were all doing what we loved. We were all very, very happy people doing what we loved. So we weren't out to create friction. We wanted to minimize it whenever possible. I wouldn't say there was bad blood between people, but people were always aware, I'm going to develop this talent, and then the X-Men office is going to take this talent from. People were always aware of that.
I think when I got the cable offer and I said yes, I think the day after I hung up the phone with Bob Harris, I got a call from Tom DeFalco.
Yeah.
And there was and they were trying to put me on contract.
Yeah.
And it was like, I was 23, and even and I was in college, and I'm like, I'm not sure I can agree to it. I'm not sure I should sign a contract right now. I don't know anything about contracts. And it's like, I wasn't saying no, but I was definitely like, okay, this is very serious, because this is a huge company saying we're going to put you on contract. That's a massive commitment, and I'm not sure what that means for me. So I was still doing cable. I was still going to work, but it was more like, I'm going to pump the brakes on any kind of official agreement. And then they were offering me free healthcare, and I'm like, I'm in Canada.
Yeah.
Wait, so you were remote this whole time? You were just shipping
Toronto the entire time.
Oh my God.
Except for a couple of times he came to the office.
Yeah, a couple of times I came to the office, which were all great, and Marvel was the Marvel people were so fun to be around, and loved. They were all creatives, and and it was just like everybody was making the same. It was just cool. It was just an amazing culture to be a part of at that time. Cool. So, but yeah,
I've never experienced anything else like it.
Yeah, I don't think I have either. It's even working on a movie, like once in a while you're working on a movie. I felt like that when I was working on Iron Man with Favreau. It was like there was this crazy enthusiasm and sort of nervous energy because it had to work, right?
Yeah.
Iron Man was, and at that point, Marvel Studios had been loaned money to make the movie, right? It wasn't their money.
It was do or die for sure.
Yeah, so there's a lot of pressure, and so, but there was a huge amount of excitement, and it just grew. I was on the movie months before Robert even was a conversation, and so we were just making Iron Man stuff and trying to make it as cool as possible. And then once we saw the Robert Downey Jr. take the audition, and found out that Marvel had agreed to that and that was going to happen, then the enthusiasm just went. It was volcanic. It was just an eruption of like, oh my God, this is going to be great. Robert's great. He's the perfect guy. And then we started to see so many VFX tests for Iron Man. from all these different VFX vendors, and you could just see it start to little by little get closer and closer and closer to like a real Iron Man suit that's like cinematically convincing. Like, so it was every month it was closer, and the camera date was coming up, and it was just more and more like sort of nervous excitement. But John was incredible, and it was just that sort of whole clubhouse feel at Marvel Studios at the time, because we were all like in one building. And
was that in the above the
it was
car
like a Marvel. It was like the Marvel offices.
Oh wow! Was it a car sales office that they were at?
It was the Mercedes-Benz Beverly Hills dealership.
Yes.
And we were in the old Playboy offices.
I hear about it. Yeah, I heard about it. Yeah.
And we rented those, and it was just this row of all the Marvel executives at that time. A lot of them were just assistants to Avi and Ari and John and then all the artists in one cluster in the middle, right? Were storyboarding, concepting, like just doing all the art department stuff. And man, it was incredible. It was incredible. It was like a big clubhouse.
Well, I didn't know that. So you kind of set the tone and seeded this whole visual development culture that's really big at Marvel today.
That culture, yeah.
With Ryan and Charlie and all that, yeah.
Yeah. Ryan was there. Andy was not there. Andy came on at Thor.
Yep. Yeah.
But Ryan was there, and Ryan set the pace. I mean, even then, he was just this concept genius.
Did you cross paths with Charlie at all?
Charlie came on at Thor as well.
Yes.
Because Ryan and Charlie came on at Thor first, and then just basically recruited Andy out of Sony, because they were both at Sony.
Sony
God of War.
Yep.
And then but Ryan was there from the very beginning, and dude, it was like Ryan designed the Mark I, right? And then we were at that point, we had left Playboy. I'm sure the Beverly Hills Mercedes dealership were very happy to see the big Marvel sign removed from above their logo. Yeah, and then we moved to Howard Hughes Studios. Those are the two huge Howard Hughes hangars in Playa Vista that were still there, that he built the Golden Goose in.
So cool.
Yeah.
You know that the Robert Downey Jr. decision was controversial. It did not.
Sorry.
Yeah, Marvel begrudgingly agreed to Robert Downey Jr.
Well, I signed an NDA, so I can neither confirm nor deny such rumors.
Okay, fair enough. I did not.
Yeah. There's no sunset clause on the NDA, so I am not permitted to publicly just talk about any of the conversations that went on with regard to casting. But
now that makes it the only thing I want to hear.
No, I'm sorry. I'm not going to talk. Definitely not going to talk about it. But yeah, when we got to Howard Hughes Studios, Ryan, by that time, Stan Winston, who was still alive, Stan Winston Studios had just finished the Mark I, and it was an operating costume, which had a motor on the back with the chains moving through everything. And the guy that put it on was like 6'5", and they were going to do camera tests in the caves that they had, basically these plaster caves that they had built, these massive sets inside the Howard Hughes stage, right?
Wow, I didn't know that. That's crazy.
Yeah, all that was built by plaster, these amazing plaster artists and construction guys, set designer guys. And they built massive sets on the Howard Hughes stage. So you're on stage, and now we're inside the tunnels of these sort of, these enemy tunnels, and you've got the Mark I literally thundering through, and Ryan's just sitting there with his camera going, "Oh my god!" Because it was like he went from his desk on a person, and it was real. And when you look through the camera, it's incredible looking.
Wow.
Cool.
Yeah. So there's a total manifestation. Like, it was incredible. And I think it was just that whole experience was amazing.
So were you tracking him, Terry? Tracking Steven throughout when he kind of moved into the film side and
Not
keeping up with
particularly,
what's going on?
everybody in the industry knows what's going on with everybody else most of
Okay.
the time. But I had lost touch with Steven for quite a while. We reconnected at a New Orleans convention a couple of years ago.
Yeah, which was amazing. It was so great to finally to reconnect.
Yes.
And
yeah,
it was great. But I think, you know, I mean, I know you can kind of know what's going on, and I think there's a lot for me that I don't know what's going on in terms of the comic book business, but you do have your favorite creators, and because of social media, that's one of the things about social media that's cool, is that people who are out there sharing, it's like they're very accessible in terms of seeing their projects, right?
Sure.
In terms of seeing their work, and even if you don't know them personally, like you at least see the stuff, and you're like, oh, that's amazing what they're doing right now. I may never meet them because they live in Italy or something like that, but the work's incredible. So I'm really that's one of the good things about social media is that artists are constantly getting exposed to each other's new projects, which I think is really cool.
It's true. Steven, in service to the title of this channel, Unhinged, what's your most unhinged comic book story? And you can name names or not.
Oh my God. Dude, I know, but I'm like, yeah. I cannot name names. I'm not.
Steven's well trained from the movie industry. He's NDRL. I get it. I totally get
it. It's like, yeah, I've worked in music videos for everybody. Like, that's a crazy business.
Oh shit, I didn't know that. I worked in music for a long time too.
Yeah, and then I, you know, but my comic book stories, I have been around some crazy parties. Grown. He's notorious for this, so I can say the Glenn Danzig parties in San Diego.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Glenn Danzig.
Okay, yeah.
Has parties in San Diego that are like invite only, and there's like doormen at the elevator and at the door, and like they're just like you have to have the invite, and it has to be given to you from Glenn in order to even get in. And then once you get into that party, you understand why.
Wow.
All right, can you get me an invite?
Dude, I don't even think I don't even know where I haven't been to San Diego in years. I don't even know if he's still throwing parties, but it was, and then it was just like a huge amount of super well-known creators are there, and it was wild. Some of it was pretty wild.
Is that how he has that crazy comic art collection? Because he has a pretty killer collection.
I think that year that I went, he had already bought like 10, 20 pages from me.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, his collection is no joke.
He bought a stack of my Extreme Studio stuff, which I think he still might even have. I don't know.
Wow.
Are you doing San Diego this year?
No. I'm in Japan.
Oh, that's right. How about Heroes Con? I think we talked about
Heroes I'm doing. I'm going to see you there, right?
Yeah, and you'll see Carl as well.
I'll be there as well. It'll be fun.
Yeah. So, but yeah.
Back to those parties.
No, I think that's as far
as he have on you, Steven? What does he have on you?
He had hired a bunch of performers.
Oh,
that's a polite term.
Yeah, and that was, and they were all.
I hope none of them was named the Punisher.
No. And then. Yeah, I think, you know, just being around, just being in the Image offices and being around Image through like, you know, the spike in the hype and then sort of the inevitable market correction, which traumatized every business, you know, and then seeing the collapse of retail and the collapse of sales and like that bubble bursting really rapidly, sometimes in a pretty ugly way. And then seeing that sort of spill out into, you know, interpersonal dynamics within the comic book,
of course.
Publishers and owners. I think that was definitely wild to see that. And yeah, but I don't have anything too crazy. I mean, the Danzig stuff is more funny, crazy. I don't have anything that involves like guns or like, you know,
I already shared my murder story on this, so
yeah, I don't know. Like there's just stuff, yeah, like
all right, so maybe Heroes Con will make some unhinged stuff happen.
Yeah, I
yeah,
might have to make something live. But yeah, I gotta say though, like even as you describe, the image offices and even just at the end of like, in a way, like it's very comparable to the music industry, where like when you go into a recording studio, they're capturing the party, right? They talked about how like when Dr. Dre and Snoop Dogg did Doggy Style, they had a house they threw parties in every day, and they had a recording studio in there, and they just went in and out of the party and the studio, and you kind of hear that in those tracks. In a very similar way, what I saw, and I think all the fans of the '90s saw, was party on pages. Like it was like everyone rocking out, having a blast of their life.
yeah. And that might have been showing up in the shipping, in the late shipping as well. Like
exactly. So
yeah. There's that part of it where no one's actually drawing and people are in the pool.
and you know what's crazy as a fan? I didn't even know this, guys. Like, it's crazy. I don't know if I ever shared it with Terry. Like, as much as like now that I'm working in the industry and people talk about those days, image didn't ship, whatever. I didn't even know this, man. I just like I was at the shop every week, and when the book came out, it came out, and I was okay with that. It was worth waiting for, right? It was like what was the latest show on Apple? Severance, right? Like, season's coming next year, and then it's like 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. When it came out, everyone was watching it, right? I felt like as a fan, it was very similar. And also similar on the music side is some of the greatest band we've known to make the hit songs we all grew up with and loved, they had the worst breakups too. I think it just comes with the territory where like when everyone's putting so much heart and passion into something, it's like, you're set up to have miscommunicate on something somewhere down the line, right? And
that level of positive passion translates when it becomes negative. It's still that level.
I also think that there's, if you are running a publishing business and you are doing huge numbers, right? I think the American business culture too is like you have to sort of get those numbers. That's a step ladder that goes in one direction, and if it starts going in another direction, all of a sudden there's narrative that begins to emerge that you are failing. You're a failing business, right? Even though you're just responding to a market correction, you're now fucking up your business. And so, I think so then you have, bad press, right? Which, I think was at that time, I think to the image owners was really important, right? Like what kind of press are we getting? And then people start to basically say, this is the end or this is like, there are huge problems at this company, right? And there are massive, and so that sometimes debt begins to accrue, or, you're not making the money that you used to. Now retailers are disappearing and it's your fault, right? And, and the distributors are on the phone, or the distributor point people are on the phone from whatever huge distributor, and they're yelling at you. And all of a sudden, everyone that was celebrating you is screaming at you, saying like, this is your fault, that this late shipping is what is driving sales down because the customers are abandoning us. Meanwhile, it was always just the number of copies being printed couldn't possibly maintain the value that was being sold to them, right? Like people were buying Death of Superman thinking like, this is my kid's college fund. Like, and you know what I mean? Or like there was this investment mirage surrounding modern books in the 90s. Like, sorry, if you publish millions of these things, they're not going to be worth, anywhere near the amount. This is, and so sort of that whole kind of stock trader futures,
exactly what happened.
Perception of comics, like that disappeared. Like that definitely exists and it's real, but not for everything that gets published, right?
And we started playing to the speculators rather than the fans.
Totally.
And the fans knew that, and they resented it. They had been there through thick and thin. And suddenly, if you release an X-Men #1 with 10 different covers, for a fan to buy those 10 covers, odds are they're going to have to give up Iron Man or Daredevil that month or something like that. And you break that chain as a fan, if you survive not buying Iron Man that month, you're like, oh, I could maybe not buy it next month too. You've lost that momentum. And one of the few fireable offenses when I was on staff at Marvel was missing shipping. If you missed twice, you probably got fired. I don't know. I managed to never miss, but I've said how before on this, which is not that I got my books in any more on time than anyone else, but I would bribe the shipping department. We had unlimited expense accounts, and I made sure at least once a week to take people out from the shipping department to lunch. So when I handed in my late book along with everyone else, I went to the top of the pile. I don't know why the other editors didn't figure that out. I certainly wasn't going to tell them, but it didn't mean I was any better at it. I was just better at bribing the right people.
It's relationships.
Yeah.
So that was an editorial 101 lesson from Terry Kavanagh.
Yes.
How to survive an editorial.
Yes.
That's thinking outside the box, at the end of the day. I mean, it's a very normal thing.
Getting things done.
You're just ahead of the game, definitely like whatever it took. And then, so Terry, what was that, Steven shared kind of his perspective, what happened during the 90s ups and downs. Like, what was it like from the Marvel side of things? Like, were you guys kind of looking at all the independents and be like, oh, you guys deserve what you get, or you guys have bigger problems on your hands to even worry about?
We had Ron Perlman on our hands, and he just raped Marvel to pay off his Revlon debt. I mean, and he wasn't even shy about it at all. So the problems were internal enough at Marvel at that point that we weren't really. We knew the industry was collapsing on itself, but anybody with half a brain knew that was going to happen.
Yeah.
From the way it had bubbled out, it just wasn't going to be sustainable. We all knew that. And like I said, people like Perlman just came in and made what he could off an X-Men 1 and a Spider-Man 1, and then jumped ship with that money.
Were you there, Terry, for the bankruptcy?
I was still a contracted writer, but I wasn't on staff anymore.
Okay.
And that was ugly. I mean, I remember I go to Marvel, once or twice a week, and there'd be more and more empty offices all the time. And I remember at one point, I was down at the end of the hall, the opposite end of where Bob Harris, he was the editor-in-chief at the time, where his office was. And somebody came out of Bob's office with Bob right behind him. And I just cheerily waved hello to Bob. And then the person in front of him just passed out, just fell face forward because they had just been fired.
Oh,
I'm just cheerily saying hello because I'm oblivious, but.
It's tough. Oh my gosh.
That's an Unhinged story.
Yeah, that's Unhinged right there. Someone fell on their face after getting fired. Well, speaking of Unhinged, like, what's Unhinged about the industry today? Like, kind of fast forwarding back to modern days. I mean, I think the whole Diamond situation is pretty damn unhinged because
I think that has,
buyers came in and
headline. You can't imagine, right? Like, we think about Steve and his presence in the business and everything that Diamond could demand from people, and and to see now what's happened to the company, it's like I have no insider information on how that was even possible, that it had gotten to this place. I know that there's a lot of people that are owed money in this collapse, and I don't know if and then it's like you have to lawyer up and try and get it back, and I don't know how long that's going to take, and I don't know if that hole is sustainable or survivable while you're in court paying lawyers to try and get your money. It's brutal. It's like whenever I ask anybody in comics about, like, how do you get your sales data? How do you know what the market's doing, right? You normally, you had a Diamond list and you knew who was selling what, how many copies, right? What percentage, how much money they were, like, all of that information was really available. It's like, I even ask people now at any of the large publishers, like, do you have like solid sales data on like what everyone's doing, how much everyone's making, or like what books they're selling? And it's like, it's really hard to get.
Yeah.
It's so fragmented, right? And it's so stratified in terms of like all the different ways that books are moving through, sales and distribution retail now. So I think that's crazy to me that it's hard to get that information now, and it was easy to get in the 90s. I think that's really weird. And then, I don't know. I mean, I look at the thing. I wouldn't say it's unhinged, but I often now I'm seeing a lot more creators go public about what they consider to be criminally underpaid artists, right? And guys just going off on saying like, this is atrocious. Like, how are we expected to continue to draw comics or make a living with this kind of page rate or this kind of compensation? Like, now we have to do all these other things. And, the creator economy when it comes to comics is not just comics anymore, right? It's not just sitting at your desk and sending pages to editorial. There's a lot of other things you have to do. And so I think that's always been, to me, watching people who create their own sort of little media creator content related channel, whether it's on YouTube or whatever, and then they're also doing whether they're working for Disney or they're in animation or something else, and then so they have like all these different businesses, all these different revenue streams. I think that has been a development that I've seen definitely among creators and definitely among people in animation, where it's like you're not just working as a storyboard artist or as a viz dev artist for Disney. You have this YouTube channel, which is plugged into Google AdSense, which is then, and then there's this merch channel, and there's all these different revenues for avenues to make money beyond your core business, which you started, when you first started out. And I think that has become the reality for so many just creative people, not just comics, but just creative people in general.
Yeah, it's true.
I remember way back when you try to get a raise for one of your artists, the general consensus that you would get back was, well, if they want to make more money, just tell them to draw more pages.
Yeah, you eat what you kill.
Right. And I'm like, I am absolutely not going to tell that to an artist who I already know is working super hard.
Yeah.
That they should just sacrifice some quality for more quantity.
Yeah.
Rather than recognize their value. But that was a common response.
Yeah, like you had your page rate, and then you had your original art sales, and then you had some very small fraction of participation if your books got over a certain number.
Right.
And that was it. Right?
Yep.
But now the game has changed completely, where, there's the convention economy, there's which is huge. I've heard actors say off the record that their convention money is worth more than their actual studio money.
Wow.
They get paid more. They can make more money at the conventions, and then they get paid on their show.
And it's cash money.
It's cash money, yeah. I'm not quite sure what the arrangement is in terms of how that money is distributed or the channels it goes through, but yeah, it's an enormously profitable business. That's why you have all of these huge actors. They're doing all these big shows, whether it's Disney Plus or Star Wars or Marvel or anything. They're doing these conventions, right? And there's the lineups, for the autographs and for the photo ops are huge.
Yeah.
It's their live show in a way. It's kind of like as a band, live show to tour, and so do these things. And there's a whole generation of like what they call themselves as con artists. They've never worked for a comic book company. They never did animation. They literally just do fan art, and they sell print, and they go on tour literally like 52 weeks out of the year. Just every single con, they're there set up. And every con you go, you'll see some of these where they're just staples, right? And they have an audience, they make a ton of cash, and they all do really well together and live on the road. They're kind of like gypsies. So I feel like it spawned this whole separate world of con artists.
And that's part of their income. And then there's a whole social media presence that they have, and that social media, whatever social media channels they've been able to utilize, those have also been monetized.
It's really interesting,
right? And so the engagement is also, so there's money on engagement, and there's money on the actual, in IRL with the convention space. And so all of these spaces, when they converge, actually make, a decent business for the artist. And I've seen artists that have been in the studio system that start to build out these other spaces and realize, like, why am I working for these large animation companies when they're just laying people off? Or why am I dealing with the uncertainty? I have a great life over here and I get to do whatever I want. As long as the only thing is you got the deal that you make. It's kind of a Faustian bargain because it's a hamster wheel you can't get off, right? Yeah. You got to keep making that stuff every week. You got to keep making that content, but I think, when you look at because you can look at their viewing data, right? And the viewing data is, once they get into like 20 million, 30, 40 million views, that's real money that Google's paying them, because those views, I mean, to register as a view, that's real engagement, because that's not just that's like someone watching for 4 or 5 minutes.
But they're earning that money. They're working hard to get those views.
They're absolutely earning it. Yeah, like I said, it's a hamster wheel. You have to know that going in, that if you're going to do that, and then it's kind of the flat curve for a minute, like everybody I've spoken to who is now doing very well with their social media engagement and their engagement economy and their business, they all kind of had years, and I don't mean years, right? Where it's just like
years.
You are producing stuff and you're only getting like 30, 40 new subscriptions a week, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think the baseline payout now from Google AdSense for 1 million subscribers is 58,700 or something like that. That's the baseline. So even if 1 million subscribers is brutal, like it's very difficult to get to that.
Yeah. Most YouTubers, people think they came around overnight. It didn't. Like it took them at least like 5 to 10 years of like.
Exactly. I've seen everybody I know who gets past the 1 million mark said it was years of toiling. In relative obscurity, and then it was this mat. It's like a rocket ship. It's like a hockey stick. It just all of a sudden takes off, right? And that's sort of the algorithm of the engagement model, where it's just like all of a sudden everyone sees that everyone else is watching, and then everyone subscribes.
Yeah, it takes years and decades to become an overnight success.
Exactly, and I think So I think that's what I'm seeing. But it's there if you want to do it, but you got to be ready to build it, and you got to have the time, and you got to have the patience, and not, it's a long game for sure.
Yeah.
But, I think comics is a long game.
It is. I think it's funny. One thing I always say is when I first started as a publisher, it was definitely like a happy accident, but I kind of approached the brand with a 1, 2, 3 year business plan. And then after 3 years into it, I was like, oh my God, I've been doing this all wrong. It should have been a 3, 5, 10 year business plan. Wow. Because that's how far you have to think ahead, and how much time it takes for just what you do to travel. Because things just travel much slower, and it takes time to build that type of fan base, relationships with talent, relationships with team, the right people, etc., to get your brand out there, and being at the shows. And so it's definitely flipped my whole perspective of like what the comic book industry is all about, and the framework of how to think about it. And then similarly with film, you kind of have to think of a 5, 10, 20 year business plan, because film does not happen overnight either, right? And so and so there's a lot of that only if you're in it will help you kind of put your head in the right place. Because if you try to rush through it, like, you're gonna come to Hollywood, work in LA for a year or two, and be like, oh, I'm not getting anywhere. And that's the truth. Like, no one gets anywhere in 1 or 2 years. It's a 5 to 10, 20 year plan.
I would say now we're dealing with a production landscape, obviously, in the traditional pipeline that is definitely migrated out of the city. So you don't actually have to be in Hollywood. You don't need to be in Hollywood anymore. In fact, it might be an asset to not be here.
Wow.
It is.
But now with the advent of AI, I'm not sure. Like, I think production itself, right, may go through a tectonic change in terms of what people are able to make within a small group of people who know what they're doing. And That could be pretty exciting and pretty terrifying if you're one of those people whose jobs may be eliminated or disrupted by the AI evolution and revolution that's certainly going to hit our civilization, our whole society, and definitely entertainment within the next. It's already hitting.
It's here. Yeah.
But yeah, but for it to fundamentally change things in the next few years. So, obviously there's a lot that has to happen with AI in terms of the judicial, because there's the massive copyright suits.
Yeah.
U.S. copyright law basically is, if you were to follow the law right now, would definitely undermine any AI's long-term prospects, because the data sets, which basically the entire company is built on, the legality of that has not been decided yet. That's going all the way to SCOTUS. So they have a couple of years, because that's going to go through the courts and then it's going to make its way to the Supreme Court eventually. I don't know what the timeline is on that. But this is why you have AI people constantly talking about resetting the social compact, which is code for the end of IP law.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right? Which is basically saying, hey, yeah, we're going to make a 24/7 comic into a movie, and I'm not going to ask Carl's permission.
Yeah, it's going to be crazy.
An AI movie of it, because I think it's cool for me and my friends. And
it's
all of a sudden there's a movie of the comic book you guys are working on, and you not participating in it. It's not making any money, and it's getting millions of views. Now what do you do? Right? The guy who made it lives in Bangalore.
Yeah, you can't control it. I mean, it's interesting if you say it.
This is the landscape that's coming.
Yes.
And I don't think anyone's ready.
I think we're already here, because if we think about even the Comic-Con artists, they're drawing Wolverine, they're drawing Batman, drawing Spider-Man, they're selling stuff. There's probably hundreds of $1 million of economy that's going out where Marvel doesn't get any royalties back. So I wonder if it's
Carl,
becoming.
they know,
because even a lot of the guys who work at Marvel goes and booths, and they're given a certain number of leniency. And so I feel like it's interesting, because now AI is going to propagate that to a whole nother level that we can never even imagine.
So I think there's truth in what you're saying. I also think that you have to measure that against brand awareness, and then all the free advertising, right? And so you have brand penetration, you have culture penetration, you have media penetration. It's all happening for free, right? Yeah. That's an organism that moves on its own, that gets deeper and deeper into the culture, into the zeitgeist, simply because it's the proliferation of those images where Wolverine is now a household name. Like, my mother knows who Wolverine is. Like, everybody knows who he is, right? That was not true in 1990.
No.
Spider-Man, yes. Wolverine, no. Right? Wolverine is now, I would say, more popular than Spider-Man.
Yeah.
Right?
Maybe, I think so too. And it's funny,
as iconic, if there's Spider-Man in the Smithsonian, Wolverine should be there too.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So along with the cape and the bat ears, like, he's there.
Yeah.
So
the good thing about AI is anything that's online and digital is trackable. So that's the difference. But I feel like as this kind of rises, and even though, like Terry, the convention stuff is not trackable, AI is very trackable. So things starts propagating online, kind of similar to how like YouTube figure a way for like record labels to track music and claim advertising dollars. I feel like that is also going to come as more content's being propagated through AI. Someone's going to figure out something for the studios to grab a hold of the IP and get a piece, So I think that's the positive.
Worry too much about them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen with them. I mean, I would not be shocked if all of the major studios at some point are just sold to technology companies.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's
like
true, like Netflix.
Warner Brothers being bought by Google or being bought by Amazon would not shock me.
No, wow.
And that happening within the next 2 to 3 years would not shock me. And obviously, when with this administration, you're not going to get the federal oversight, or the antitrust lawsuits of conglomeration. So it's just like, Google can own Warner Brothers and it's fine.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. I think that's
Warner Brothers. Their debt ratio is 2 to 1. They're 40 billion, and they're managing a debt load of 40 billion, and they can't get out from under it.
Wow.
They're worth 18.
Yeah,
right?
Bad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean,
someone's
with
gonna
that
buy
stuff,
them.
everything we
Right?
just talked about is crazy because it's the world that our next generation is growing up in, and it's complicated. And so I
Oh,
also feel like the next generation is typically more punk rock, kind of like how we were the generation before us. And so I do feel like in the last 6 months, comic book shops have been doing really well. Barnes and Nobles are growing like everywhere, and so I do feel like there is this kind of like anti-establishment of like, hey, everything's going technology. I'm gonna go back to the basics, which are the comics and the books themselves.
yeah.
Which I think for me, like, it's a great thing. Yeah,
I hope that's true.
yeah,
I think there's a certain. This is the thing that's really encouraging, is that when I talk to Marvel or DC, they don't want any AI in their comics at all, right? And whenever AI gets into their books, it gets online right away, and the customers are like, "Fuck this shit! I'm not paying for this if this is what you guys are doing," right?
Mhm.
And I think that's the thing I love about the comic book culture, is that we want human artists, we want human creators. I want to go to a convention and meet the guy that drew the page or meet the guy who wrote the story, right? I don't want to just look at my book and go, it's just there's no credits because the machine made the whole thing.
Right.
And I also think that the people who, and this is the other thing, the other side of that equation, the people who might be the actual employers of the AI company to make content expressly understand that, yeah, you can pay nothing and have a comic book produced. And when people find out that no one made it, that it's an AI comic book, it loses all material monetary value. People will not buy it.
I agree.
So they will look at it, but they are like, this is not worth money to me. And I think that dichotomy is really interesting, because as much as it's going to proliferate, I don't think anyone's buying any of it.
That's interesting. That is
No,
uplifting.
I think
It's
I
not
also
worth
feel
money.
like people buy comics for the people that's the storytellers behind
They're
it.
buying the work. It's called work for a reason, right?
Mhm.
They're buying the human labor. They're buying the human work. So
True.
that's what's worth money to them, right?
Mhm.
If you find out that no one cared, like no one even cares that about the thing you're holding because a machine made the whole thing, it's immediately a total disconnect for the consumer. It's a disconnect for the reader.
As it
Like,
should.
if you didn't care about making it, why would I care about this story at all? Right? It will be a curiosity, right? That's why you can, that's why you can look at these YouTube videos, or these videos that go out where they're made by AI, and it's like they're a curiosity. No one's buying it. No one's going to pay money for it, right?
Yep.
So it's sort of a conundrum, because the seduction, if you own a business that creates content, is, oh my God, it's so cheap to make something. And then at the end of that equation, no one wants to buy what you've just made for nothing.
Because you didn't make it, you generated it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's
you
all
generated
generated, exactly.
right?
Yeah.
You ordered. I got into a guy. I mean, I call it, you ordered a sandwich.
Yeah.
You went to a menu and you ordered a sandwich, right? And like nobody wants to buy it. No one wants to buy it.
Yeah, for real. Yeah. All right, so I think we're over the hour, and Steven, thanks for making time for this.
Thanks,
Yeah,
guys.
much appreciated, Steven.
Terry, I'll see you in a couple of weeks.
See you there.
Hang out.
Carl, I'll see you. You're going to be there too?
I'll be there as well. But stay
right.
out. We gotta land the show.
hang
We
out.
gotta upload our recordings. And
Yeah,
so,
wait a minute, Steven.
Yep, folks, everyone, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Terry Kavanagh's Unhinged. Thank you, Steven, for being part of this, and we'll all see you guys next week.
Is it next week?